If anyone's in chat, which I'm not quite sure that they are yet, let us know if you can hear us, if you like what you're hearing, if you like what you're seeing. But yeah, welcome to our second stream. I think we potentially have some of the camera issues figured out. We have a slightly more stable camera with worse quality. So hopefully that's good. But yeah, that's what we're trying for right now. I'm going to pull up our Twitch stream on my phone just to make sure that we're doing the right stuff.
Yeah, I was just confirming that we've got good audio.
Awesome.
Good video,
Excellent.
but
Excellent.
we're waiting on the confirmation, though, but hopefully coming.
And if you're just joining us, this is probably what it's going to be like, is 2 minutes in, we're both on our phones. And that's going to be most of the stream.
Okay, that's simpler.
Wow, it's trippy. Seems good.
Yeah, great.
We have a little bit of the fan noise, but I think that's actually more this than it is this, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I can remove that in post easily.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think the big story is that Zohran Mamdani, the progressive leftist candidate for New York City mayor, won the primary. I'm not entirely clear on what that means. He's not mayor yet, but he's likely to become mayor.
Yeah. So I think the actual election is in November or something, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And it was also like ranked ballots, right? So we won't actually know until next week, because whoever the second choice was gets redistributed to people's first choice. So it's kind of a crazy system. It's what Trudeau wanted for Canada, but we never ended up getting. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, I think we should just be able to pull this up. Give me a second here.
Yeah, well, we spoke about this last week, and I think we had a pretty hard take.
Yeah.
On it. We also might spend a little bit of time qualifying a bit of that hard take, because of course he's emerged as the leftist messiah.
Right.
So people are wondering perhaps whether he's the last hope for quote unquote progressive values. This is a long narrativistic.
Yeah, we don't have to read this whole thing. We're just kind of going through. It's just to sort of have something on
these dynamic ads on the New Yorker, particularly.
Yeah, this is great. Doesn't that look good? That's probably entirely AI, by the way. I'm almost certain
at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, he beats Cuomo, which I mean, this is funny. Cuomo, you see there, he's caught in this scandal, and I don't know much about his reputation, but I can imagine this is the establishment's idea of who the establishment candidate is.
Yeah.
I think, to begin a little bit, not our tirade, but I do think that Mamdani is sort of actually quite an establishment candidate in ways that people might find surprising.
Okay.
Not because he's actually supported by the establishment. You don't need to be supported by the establishment to be an establishment candidate. I mean, give the most obvious piece of evidence. I mean, they've just met in NATO. And when people talk about increasing their defense budgets from 2% to 5% of GDP, which is, tens upon tens of billions of dollars, some people have been quoted saying this is how you, quote, protect the welfare state. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what Mamdani is trying to do is bring back a coherent welfare state. He wants the welfare state to be a viable political option. So what's the strange relationship then between NATO and the most powerful countries in the world wanting to update their defense budgets from 2 to 5%, claiming the same thing as Mamdani? There must be some alliance here politically.
Okay.
As in, there's a relationship between militarism as the new economic frontier, and however in the heck you actually create out of Mamdani's proposals a functioning system, a functioning economy.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing that is sometimes difficult to articulate, is that, like, because on paper, I think especially for me, I read all this stuff, I'm like, wow, free daycare, free buses, or, heavily subsidized, all this stuff. Sounds great. It sounds like good social democratic policies. It's very like Bernie Sanders as well, right?
But
It's
where's
like a
the
big...
but here's the cruelty. Where's the economics?
Right.
Who's going to pay those? Who's paying for this exactly?
I don't know about
With all those
Mamdani. I know that
taxes?
I know that the Bernie Sanders thing was all based on a big tax on Wall Street.
But you and I talk about this. There's a guy named Gary Stevenson. People will know him.
Yeah.
He's the big, trader turned, I don't know, political maverick.
Mm-hmm.
Who also teaches people economics online. And his whole solution, his political solution, is just to tax the rich.
Right.
Which is not a bad idea because, say, it's sort of politically, ooh, what a crazy revolutionary idea.
Right.
It's not very revolutionary. And we talk about this. There isn't money in the stock market, in my opinion. Like, what there is a lot of crystallized wealth.
Yeah.
The moment you take the money out of it, the system crashes. So the money has to be there. People have to continue to be able to speculate in real estate or, government debt or American shares.
Mm-hmm.
That's a vital part of how the economy functions. If you start taxing that process, it's not, oh no, the business people aren't going to come to Canada or the United States anymore. And that's the classic argument.
Right.
What's going to happen is that system, on the basis of which we have a certain sort of theater of, we can afford this, really existing money and wealth, will crash.
Okay.
So there's a danger of using a taxation approach. They have lots of money, but I'm always afraid of the fact that it seems as though our monetary system as a whole relies upon radical market speculation. We've spoken about this in the context of central bankers. The sober central banker meets, wakes up the next morning and cleans up the party from last night.
Right.
They're not two different people. It's one system.
Yeah.
While it's interesting, Mamdani has these ideas that we'd all love to see in practice. It's not. There's not a program for how he's moving us beyond the system itself.
Right. Well, I think that it's easy, and this was probably like the real super far left critique of even Bernie Sanders was, post 2008, if your idea is to have stricter controls on Wall Street and not to do away with Wall Street or decouple Wall Street as the basis of society, then you're maybe missing the mark a little bit, which it does feel like, Mamdani, it kind of suffers from the same thing.
And I think it's partly because it's really, really, really difficult to imagine giving people a political solution, an emergency political solution, say to affordability issues
Right.
or housing issues, without imagining it within the fairy tale of economics. Take away that fairy tale, again, the system narrative collapses. And that's not really a situation you want to be in politically, where you can't even offer people a solution such as, but if we do, X, Y, Z, but X, Y, Z needs ABC,
Right.
which is, various parts of the economy, and people struggle to think without an economic background. And as we also discussed, I think in the last stream, there's this sort of what I can only call a kind of cabal of progressive economists, and we looked at them.
Yeah, the people who sponsored him or
Varoufakis
yeah.
and Galbraith and various others, and it struck us a little bit, that this is what they really want defended is economics, and that there is a sort of contrasting political program, which is sort of mixture of AI and defense. I almost want to say AI isn't a full-blown replacement of all productivity paradigms. And as far as I'm concerned, monetary systems and many other things, all the traditional wiring of the economy. And militarism, maybe not as a fully fledged departure from productivity, but like as a way of dealing with these excessive imbalances in the economy, massive amounts of debt, and also clearly, as I think we'll get into later, maintaining the state, maintaining their relationship with the United States.
Right. Well, because I think for a lot of people, the Zohran policies all kind of make sense in effect, right? If you make childcare more affordable, it's very easy to see what the rolling effects of that would be. Or if you make buses free, or if you make what was the big one? State-run grocery stores to disrupt food deserts.
Yeah.
It's very easy to imagine how that improves, the day-to-day life of working class New Yorkers and all that kind of stuff. But I wonder, maybe let's contrast that with how does NATO and the G7's proposal to invest more in your military? What in what way is that being posited as a viable economic strategy?
It's a great question, because this is where you see that there are differences even within the establishment, within this, or what we could call maybe the status quo. Because the NATO people, it's a complicated system. Much of the military relies upon something called procurement, which is the system by which you procure military technology. And it's basically a sort of specialized complex system of trade, defense contracts, in other words.
Yeah.
And, governments are the massive buyers, and, they get defense contracts, say with the United States or with Israel or with, companies in Germany. And how you coordinate that, and let's say if everybody agrees that we're going to increase the amount we're going to spend, and you get it through some consensus through NATO. Okay, we're going to raise the defense spending targets, but once you get that kind of consensus, then suddenly it's the new status quo, right? It's everyone is spending money on military, so it's no longer a political risk to go and do it.
Right.
So that kind of changes the fault lines of what's economically viable. Someone like Mamdani is obviously working from a grassroots perspective. He's working with quote unquote average people.
Yeah.
So it's two completely different parts of the system communicating, but trying to establish some status quo. Obviously, the way that Mamdani wants to do it is by appealing to working people's capacity to participate, how they want their society to look. Again, it's definitely the Bernie Sanders platform. Yeah. It is a kind of leftist common sense.
Yeah.
Is the idea almost.
Totally.
Whereas, NATO is it's a military cabal. It is literally a selling defense industry. NATO is the ultimate way that we maintain what seem to be extremely needless wars that go on for needlessly long times.
Right. Well, it seems like both of them sort of have this somewhat of a fantasy. So this is the big headline, right? Defense. Mm-hmm. That's huge. Right.
Yeah, he's sort of stoppered it by saying it's going to be 10 years down the line.
Right.
He's quote not going to sign any post-dated checks.
Yeah.
This is.
We need to find a ton of money to meet this target. Like a crazy amount.
It's about as much money as you'll need to probably find to get to your special grocery stores.
Right.
And pay for your daycare, which again is how the system, I would argue, regulates itself through a conflict. Oh, should we spend that $100 billion on daycare, or should we spend that $100 billion on defense contracts? Mm-hmm. Obviously, the cabal of progressive economists are going to say, oh, we'll spend it on daycare.
Yeah.
But as you said already, there was this critique already of Bernie Sanders, but it's not enough. Okay, so you get what, a year, 2 years, 5 years where you can afford daycare? Is that enough? Is stabilizing housing enough to fix the housing crisis, to fix a real estate in the United States, or speculation or gross financialism? I don't think so.
Right. Well, it's like they both seem to take the same kind of stance, which is that it's like a problem of organization, that we're just like spending the money in the wrong places, or that things are just kind of like mismanaged, basically. That there is like an amount of money, the amount of money that we're getting out from what we're putting in is fine. It just needs to be organized in a different way. But I think that like what we're saying is that a lot of that money that sort of actually circulates or actually gets put to work can only do so because it's sort of backed by all of this idea that there's a bunch of money stashed away somewhere.
Or in a weird way,
really isn't.
Or the idea that there is a really working society somewhere,
right,
that keeps things safe as houses. Mm-hmm. Real workers. When you read, say, this quote from Carney, that means ports, airports, infrastructure to support the development and exportation of critical minerals, telecommunications, and emergency preparedness systems. This is obviously in the context of defense, but this is also in the context of this is how we're going to quote unquote fix the Canadian economy.
Right.
To his mind, yes, this is an organizational issue, but this is also supposed to be the kind of the defibrillator that brings back that really existing society that has gone out of focus.
Right.
So that, however, gross financialism can return in force. So in a rather cruel way, Mamdani could accomplish something very similar. He could help the fiction be sold that, people are happy to work and that productivity is going to get on the rise. And, this is the thing, right? No sensible economist wants people to be paying out the wazoo for rent or for food because it creates inflation. And economists hate inflation because it ruins your capacity to tell what the price of something should be, right? If inflation is a factor, as opposed to, say, cost of materials, cost of transport, if you have 30% for inflation, well, you don't really have the right price. And then markets can't, quote unquote, do their job of figuring out what the price should be. But this is also what illustrates, I think, the underhand set of loyalties here is that, so what we're meant to be really afraid of is inflation. What we're really afraid of when our housing goes up or our grocery stores don't work is that the basic economic metrics by which we organize the price system, and with it everything else, right? Our money systems, our financial systems, our industrial systems, they don't work if the price system isn't working. Nobody's asking the question, well, maybe the price systems don't work for rather structural reasons. And then again, maybe you go to some of the structural reasons and it's looking at infrastructure and telecommunications and critical minerals. Is that enough? It's a lot bigger than daycare and, affordable housing. It's at a national scale. But again, they can only do it if they have a program of abject militarism. They can only do it if they have NATO, crazy NATO spending targets, if they can have, endless wars, if they can get productivity back, not from everyday workers working at daycare and in education and in housing, but people working to build, an expanded version of the military-industrial complex.
Right.
That's not a great way to get your productivity back, not least because I think that we're just not facing the bigger issue that it won't work to fix the monetary system. It won't fix our productivity issues because it's not going to fix gross financialism. When Carney came around, he wanted to do this without this added extra of it's going to be a giant military project.
Right.
But increasingly I get the feeling that it's just a giant military project.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. Well, that's what's really scary, right? Is that when we see this, right? Canadian workers in shipyards and labs, shop floors right across the country will make the drones, the icebreakers, the aerospace technologies, and much more that's needed to build a more secure world. What that means is that it requires those forever wars to continue.
Forever wars, which is funny because the right, especially the alt-right, the people who Trump's coalition, they hate the endless wars. They consider them to be a product of the Democratic Party. I don't disagree with them on that point, actually. Yeah. But definitely there's going to be some kind of wars to continue, some sense of threat.
Yeah.
But it's literally, this is the new productivity contract. And again, contrast this with Mamdani, right? So look at them side by side. What is the difference between workers in shipyards, labs, shop floors right across the country, making the drones, the icebreakers, aerospace technologies, etc., versus what is for many people, even within this sort of status quo spectrum, a slightly more, I hate to use this word, but slightly more socialist approach of daycares, rent control.
Right.
This is where Mamdani is not the establishment's friend, but not because he's such a revolutionary.
Yeah.
But because people do not think that rent controls, while they might not like inflation, they do not think that rent controls are a good idea. They do not think that any control on the commercial system is a good idea.
Right.
What they do think is a good idea, the sort of proper establishment, is exactly to get massive productivity back through drones, icebreakers, and aerospace technologies. And another interesting point that this addresses is something we've been talking about for months, which is how are all these countries going to operate without being able to send their surpluses to the United States, to the vacuum cleaner that is Wall Street?
Right.
All this extra money. It maintains actually global peace through the supremacy of the American dollar. Well, again, the Americans don't want it. Well, what an interesting new coalition, contract, and trade world that Trump wants to build. Oh, he definitely, if he creates a new hyper-securitized society, he might actually fix his whole trade deficit problem. The Americans might become an export superstar like China is, or Japan used to be, and so on, which would basically, one, answer Trump's big issue that he wants to fix the trade deficits. He wants a less valuable American dollar to the extent that it means greater power in manufacturing that can actually live in the United States. So he's pretty happy. And so are all these progressives. Maybe get that photo up of them all smiling at Trump, because it's such an interesting moment in history.
Yeah.
Because one of the more interesting arguments that people like Macron in particular, not of course Meloni, who's up there, the blonde above the other blonde on the right corner, but Macron and Keir Starmer and Mark Carney and the former Dutch Prime Minister to an extent as well, but yeah, particularly Macron and Starmer are what's called the radical center.
Yeah.
And they came to power in part, certainly Macron, because of people like Le Pen, who were the alt-right.
Yeah.
And I can't quite see the German guy, though maybe he's the guy in the front. I'm not really sure, because he recently was a new guy now. But in any event, he's also there for very similar reasons, because, you have the alt-right rising in Germany.
Yeah.
And so the radical center emerges as this progressive in intense scare quotes, that says, okay, oh my God, no, vote for us, because you can't vote for, now we have real Nazis that want to get into parliament.
Sure.
And the only problem with that line of argumentation is, and it's something that Yanis Varoufakis says, is that the radical center needs the radical right. They need the alt-right, because they belong together. The progressive center, or the radical center, whatever you want to call them, they continue the program of austerity. The program of austerity leads to low incomes, lower productivity, which means people don't have enough money to spend on anything, etc. And then corporations don't want to improve their products because nobody's going to buy them. So they go back and buy their shares, etc., etc. That whole kind of worldview. Well, that then creates the conditions for an alt-right to emerge and say, well, this is bullshit, and we hate Brussels, and we hate the elite. And of course, superficially, they're right. But the problem is that it's another one of these circles where they kind of need each other, and it's not a genuine political break. So what's astonishing, and this is my original point, is just that they're also smiling in this photo because they feel like possibly they're finding, of course I know they're smiling at some joke that Trump made or whatever, but it's a metaphor for how they're smiling at the fact that they have maybe an answer. The EU could not be happier. They found their answer to Trump.
Right.
Oh my gosh. They don't necessarily have to immediately tank their own financial systems. One, they can start speculating on their military industries. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll actually bring back military manufacturing.
Yeah.
I don't want military manufacturing back, but even if I did want it back, it's not going to come back because the productivity issues in the European Union are so extreme.
Right.
Canada, the situation is a little bit more complex, but they all feel like they found the contract for all of their new trade deals and for the new global order of trade under Trump, where the United States is no longer just kind of effectively bankrolling everyone else's speculation, but in which, nope, they're going to start doing manufacturing. They want to start exporting. They want greater control. If you're going to use the dollar, you're going to pay to use the dollar, and it's going to be exorbitant. But America's going to do what America does best and be the best country for militarism in the world. And it's sad, but they're all very happy because now they finally found a place for themselves within that new global order. So, yeah. I mean, compare that to Mamdani, because Mamdani is trying to address the same issue. He's an economist.
Right.
They're all economists. They're still trying to figure out, again, as you said, this organizational issue, moving money around.
Yeah.
But we might not like this strategy of militarism because it won't work. It will not work. Economically, societally, politically.
Yeah.
It'll just be an elite disaster of magnificent proportions. And we're already seeing exactly the kind of world, unfortunately, that Trump is building in Iran and Israel right now. It's not pretty. He's not able. I am not a fan of the pre-Trump presidents by any stretch, from Obama to Bush. They're all the same to me. And I'm not looking for that cheap stability back, which is what it was. It was very cheap stability. Endless wars is cheap stability. Probably the difference for Trump is not to have endless wars, but just to have war. You know, just to have kind of gross carnage. But anyway, he's not able to stabilize. No matter how angry he gets, he's not able to actually be a point of stability. He hasn't produced the politics for it or the economics or it. On the contrary, he's created, I think, serious conditions in which the rivalries and the competition is even more extreme than ever, in which the insecurity, the global insecurity, is even more extreme than ever. So, yeah, to me, to borrow that classic phrase, if the choice is between Mamdani and NATO, these two different ways of getting our productivity back, I think they're both worse.
Totally. No, absolutely. Well, that's I think, to get back to your point too about Carney, is that's what's really unfortunate is like Carney almost ran with some of these Mamdani, talking points about affordability. Right. I mean, that's been sort of the key thing for maybe the past 5 years of political campaigns is affordability. It's like affordability is the left-wing position and often part of the right-wing position. The right wing also lately loves to talk about law and order and securing society, securing the world. But yeah, Carney had a lot to say about affordability and middle-class people and et cetera, that you always hear from kind of lib candidates. And then, as you said, immediately, we're only a few months into it, is meeting with NATO and saying, yeah, we're going to spend more than twice as much as we have been on military technology. And that the way that Canada is going to solve its affordability crisis is we're going to employ people to make drones and then send them overseas to bomb people.
Yeah. And I mean, think about the squeeze that Canada was in with the manufacturing sector and all the tariffs, and every single country here, every country in the world has been under the tariff threat from Trump. Say what you will about Trump. Oh my gosh, he's playing an extraordinary game of chess. It's a very scary game of chess. It's not a game I want to be playing or want anyone else to be playing.
Totally.
But look at all of them. They were so mad at him. He's been able to slap them on, of course people say, oh, he's wishy-washy.
Yeah.
And what was the acronym? TACO. Trump always chickens out, which was their little smug way.
They got him.
Rather than realizing that, of course, it's been brilliantly intentional, because now he's got them all and they're smiling, and they know that the answer to tariffs is militarism, and militarism is the answer to how America is going to renegotiate its supremacy. It's kind of like I couldn't have written it better myself.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable.
It's impressive.
It's really crazy. It makes you wonder if it's really, is it him, or is it, we can imagine Steve Bannon and Roger Stone and whoever the hell, probably realistically people we don't even know.
Well, let's be fair. We do know a number of them because they write about it extensively. And generally, each of them, there was the guy who wrote the big thing on tariffs. I forget his name, Steve Mirren or something like this. And he really believed in tariffs as an economic strategy. And you recall at the time, everyone was saying tariffs don't make sense economically. And then here there were people who were claiming, no, they do work economically. Because if you get back, if they actually work to bring back, eventually, some kind of manufacturing, and or you get compromises from people, we will lower your tariffs if you basically pay some way. Maybe it's defense spending. Who knows what Trump has got in all these deals, right? You have to go through them all to see the extraordinary concessions he's been able to get from other countries. Pretty extraordinary. And without rocking the global system too, right? That was the other worry, is that if Trump moved too quickly, the house of cards would collapse. Right. The Canadian auto manufacturing sector is a good example. Like, it is totally coupled. So you have to kind of work slowly. If you don't, you could risk the entire auto manufacturing sector, just like we saw when there was that outrage by the stock market and financial markets in face of the tariff threat. And within a day, trillions of dollars would go in and out of the stock markets, depending on how people felt. And then there was the big worry, is it going to expand into the treasury markets? And is it going to signal that people don't even want to buy American debt, which is a big thing, because it means they don't trust the Americans. And that is huge, because where the hell are they going to put their money? I don't know. So maybe Trump knew that, and people like Steve Mirren bank on that, or again, whatever his name is. They bank on that nobody's actually going to lose faith in the Americans, because where the heck are they going to go? Not the EU. The EU, they're the absolute puppet of the Americans, and all the evidence suggests that. Where they can put their money in China?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they already put lots of money in China, or where they can put it in the Middle East. No, they're not. And there are really good reasons why that could. So that was the gamble. And another issue where there was tons of sort of dysphoria was obviously it's still now around interest rates. Is the Federal Reserve going to cut them around? Is there actually inflation? Right? The idea was tariffs will cause massive amounts of inflation because they'll be increasing the prices of everything artificially. But again, if you're Trump, you're like, well, but I'm bringing back manufacturing. Right. Now, for most people, they say, well, that's going to take years. And he's like, oh, no, it's not. Because if people start building and investing now, so that's always going to be his worldview. And we did an episode on this. We spoke about how it's not a fact anymore. Because this is how economics works. If you believe that inflation is going down, it has a big impact on whether inflation is going to go down or up. Expectation is everything in markets. And that's the nature of Trump's big gamble. So with Steve Bannon, he has a couple of points. He wanted to get manufacturing back. He wanted to end the endless wars of the Democrats. That was one of his big talking points. And he wanted to close the border. These are the three Bannon points. Yeah. So he's pretty happy. Again, how they deal with this question of we want to end the endless wars, but bring up militarism like it's never been before, not quite sure. But clearly it's addressing their productivity issues, so in that sense it is helping them. But what you have then, this is how I would describe it, is a series of people in Trump's cabinet who take a hardline position on a couple of issues. You get one guy on tariffs, one guy on the border, one guy on getting manufacturing back. And I think they all kind of believe it rather intensely and sincerely, and the setup of markets is such that expectation is everything. If you can control people's expectations, you basically can control the direction of markets, the flow of capital, what gets built, what doesn't, where investment is going, etc. Yeah. And therefore, Trump's role in all of this is obviously to coordinate this and, to be the ultimate juggler of expectation. And he is very good at that. He's, again, he's scary good at it, actually. He's scary good at keeping people on their toes and then relaxing and playing with expectations with the understanding that expectation is the last piece of that puzzle. It's the kind of alchemy or the magic that makes a good policy, that distinguishes a good policy from a bad one. Pretty much.
Yeah. It's wild. It's Trump 2.0.
Well, it's also the world 2.0.
Totally.
Maybe we could talk a bit about what the heck we should do in view of it. If it's not Mamdani.
Sure. No, because I think that we're a fairly progressive brand podcast, whatever you want to call it, or leftist or, forward thinking. And so
something like that.
I think that we would align ourselves probably, I don't know, spiritually with a lot of Mamdani voters or on our positions on how we think that, what's valuable to us personally or how we think that society should be arranged. But obviously we're very critical. So what do you think is a better, I don't know, approach, policy?
Well, to take us back to last stream, when we looked at, what's his name? The end of history guy on Doom Scroll.
Francis Fukuyama. On Doom Scroll, yeah.
And he spoke about infrastructure.
Yeah.
And again, it's sort of like when you and I talk about Carney's rhetoric. We're like, well, we like some part of the rhetoric.
Yeah.
And I didn't like Fukuyama's explanation. But you might think, okay, well, infrastructure. But he has this whole reference to abundance of the Democratic Party,
right?
Which is just like
he's a big Ezra Klein abundance politics.
The worst. I think it might be the worst political program ever written. I really think that. And I know people are going to say, "What do you mean? Don't you want high-speed transit in the United States?" Absolutely, absolutely. I want it in the United States, and I want it in Canada as well. I believe in public transit, and so this is obviously, Mamdani is a mayor. Or, a maybe mayor to be.
Right.
It's not a federal program. And I recognize that. So he's not going to be talking about high-speed transit across the country. But there's a danger that you can talk about infrastructure and not mean it in a good way. Not necessarily mean it in a way that actually gets you beyond the assumptions, the very naive assumptions of progressive economics or progressive politics. Which again, basically, we spoke about it last stream, basically has this view that as long as the money keeps moving and you have quote unquote productivity and it's flowing into the right industries, you have a functioning economy. And it's an idea that was born in the 1930s. And I'm very skeptical of this idea. And I'm very skeptical of whether or not it is enough to build really great infrastructure and fix society. And I think this is the idea of people like Carney and people like Fukuyama, and to an extent the abundance movement. They're like, well, just fix the infrastructure. And I think that, one of the reasons I think that we got into the situation in 2008 with the financial crisis and why we've had giant affordability crises is because we haven't learned some lesson with the internet. And I think that maybe we could start by pivoting towards talking about internet infrastructure. But here there are also tons of pitfalls. Look at all the telecommunications companies in Canada selling off, piece by piece, all of the telecommunications, or 49.9% of the telecommunications infrastructure, probably so that they can invest it back in telecommunications.
Right.
They need to get off a certain amount of debt, so that they can continue a cycle of investment that can allow them to basically build the AI data centers that they want. And again, so this is the image of the internet infrastructure we're getting, which is terrible. It's AI primarily. And we have a new minister for AI in Canada. And I think, so again, but be careful. Okay, if you're going to do internet infrastructure, that doesn't mean AI infrastructure. So that's another thing to avoid. It's something about overcoming, I think, productivity, something about overcoming this very naive idea in progressive economics that if you just have people doing things, the economy will reflect it. I don't believe this. Again, it's an idea of Keynes, and the idea is we can afford what we can do. I think this is not true. And I think it's not true for a very simple reason. And it's true in the context of energy, which we also spoke about last stream. Energy is not simply certain internal processes. There's an energy cost associated with certain things. So even if you get something carbon neutral, there's an energy cost of getting carbon neutral.
Right.
So I can put carbon neutral in my packaging, but there's another associated energy cost. And those energy costs matter. And you know what? I don't think economics does well with energy. Point blank. David Suzuki said once, economics, it calls the environment an externality. The environment isn't included. It will never be included in economics. So we need something better than economics if we're going to talk about something like energy. And the same thing holds of our monetary system. Money is there's a cost to money that isn't necessarily monetary. It's all of the weird contradictions that we get. Gross financialism is a cost of money. Affordability crises are a cost of money. There's a cost, in other words, to having economics as the tool that allows you to do what you need to do, right? That cleverness of saying we can afford what we can do is basically money is just there to help us facilitate what we can do. Right. But money extracts a pound of flesh. Economics extracts a pound of flesh. And we can spend a long time talking about what that pound of flesh is, whether it's, it's not even, again, just environmental costs. That wasn't really my point with energy. My point is that there are certain costs that we cannot factor into economics. Therefore, it's not a total costing system. You cannot use economics to cost reality. There are literally hidden costs that will not be costed in my opinion.
Totally. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to revisit come November, I guess, and then we'll have to revisit if it would be wild if he became, mayor of New York. It'll be crazy. It'll be really crazy. I wonder what it'll mean for, progressive candidates, progressive economics. We're not in favor of it, but I wonder what we'll see. I almost wonder if this, as the radical center, is a reflexive, version of the alt-right. I almost wonder if this kind of what would be called, radical left then rises as a response to this radical center, almost in the same kind of toxic way where they keep each other almost in check, right? The imagination of the left is constrained to kind of inverse whatever the center or the right proposes, rather than imagine something that's very, very new or very, very radical. Yeah,
I think you will probably get an alt-left. I think for many people, this is already a kind of alt-left. Again, it is just important to understand that Mamdani is using an existing framework for dealing with affordability. It's the same framework that these guys are using at NATO.
Right.
There's no difference. It's the same fundamental axioms. I'm sorry. You can have certain moral qualms about spending money on bombs as opposed to daycare, but it's still within the context of an affordability issue, of an economic issue. And the question is whether we can think beyond that. And I think we have to try and figure out how we can do it. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been interested in, whether Carney would be would you work with someone like Carney? What does it mean for podcasters to work with someone like Carney? What are the actual practical channels for political engagement or doing things or discourse? I don't know.
Yeah, the invite is there, Mr. Carney.
I think we need completely different frameworks. I think we need a better framework than the political spectrum, and that's not because I believe in some kind of more universal system or something more holistic than right and left. I mean, I'm happy to call myself a leftist. I have no problem with that within the context of liberalism. Within the context that 250 years ago, a split in the House emerged, literally, and some people went on the right and some people went on the left. And the question is still for me, okay, if we're not liberals anymore, then why are we dividing the House? Can we have another House? Somebody's asked the question, do you think Cuomo will run as an independent? Right, because so this is the significance of the primary. So Cuomo can still run again. I have no idea. I don't find Cuomo conceptually very interesting. I don't particularly care if Mamdani wins. I'm not sort of practically engaged in one of them winning over another. If Cuomo is this stereotype, which I think he is for many people on the American left, for this sort of corrupt, I have no idea whether Cuomo fits this stereotype. This is pure prejudice on my part. What are these this kind of corrupt jingoist who's in the hands of bankers? I don't know. If that's what the left is so afraid of, I don't think Cuomo is that. I don't think he's much of anything. I mean, unless he starts talking about remilitarizing and resecuritizing New York City, and whether he wants to become, a giant Trump supporter, I wouldn't. He's not conceptually very interesting. Mamdani, again, is only conceptually interesting to the extent that he has some strange, well, not strange. He represents a frustration on the left that is boiling over. Will it be as effective, as toxic as you put it, as the alt-right in the United States or in Germany? Or I don't think so. I think for really specific reasons, I don't think so. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of my thing, is that, the idea that, I mean, maybe he'll run as an independent. I think, quite frankly, it's like, if you think that an establishment Dem who's veering closer. Anyways, we'll answer your question, but the idea of like an establishment Dem who was kicked out of office for sexual assault allegations at the height of Me Too, being the establishment candidate, or being the candidate that New Yorkers who are facing an affordability crisis would ever vote for, is kind of just a huge joke to me. I'm honestly shocked. Maybe they got some good polling data, but I think that it kind of just speaks to.
I think Cuomo just represents a figure or an icon of power that no longer is very powerful. You know what I mean? I don't think he's a kind of Trump figure. Again, as for this question of, I'm not a democratic socialist. Would I be a supporter of Bernie? I'm not sure. I think that Bernie probably has a lot of things to work on. I don't think it was just Hillary who stopped him from winning. But to the question of hope, yeah, well, sure. Okay, hope is good. It's also, hope is the last thing that left Pandora's box, the last sort of mysterious evil. I think I like Zizek's phrase, the courage of hopelessness. I'm not sure whether hope is what we need, but again, if there's some defense of democratic socialism is a market-based economic phenomenon. I'm not a socialist in any sense because I don't want any economic answer to these problems, which unfortunately socialism still is. In that respect, Bernie Sanders and democratic socialism is not nearly radical enough. And Mamdani, again, the question of whether what he's doing, whether it's affordable or not, is not a kind of conservative economic critique of Mamdani. It's pointing out that Mamdani is in a spectrum that includes the powers who are convening in The Hague for NATO, who are trying to fix this big productivity problem, who are trying to fix the monetary system and fix the financial system. And this is why you had all those progressive economists supporting Mamdani, because they're desperate to see economics supported as a concept. And economics includes socialism. Economics includes free daycare. That's why, again, some people were quoted as saying, if you want to protect the welfare state, you need to invest in militarism. So there is some uncomfortable alliance between militarism and the welfare state. So I say, screw them both. If I'm not interested in a welfare state if the only way we can stabilize it is with gross militarism. And the reality is Mamdani has not come up with any other more compelling or competent program to tell me how exactly he's going to stabilize the welfare state. And therefore, I'd rather spend my time thinking on something more interesting and more productive than the welfare state, personally.
Yeah, if you missed it from earlier, Timbit 99 or Timbits 99, I think our big takeaway was, we talked about that usually the progressive, and we kind of ascribed it to the Bernie Sanders platform, which was, here's a bunch of social programs we're going to pay for with a massive tax on Wall Street. Our position is a little bit, let's get rid of Wall Street, or let's not have a basis for productivity, or let's not have our housing or our pension fund or the way that we take care of people so intimately tied to gross financialism.
Because the money isn't there. You cannot tax your way out of a problem. Once you start to tax them, the money will just vanish because it was never there in the first place. Nobody on the left wants to face right now that the money isn't there.
Yeah. It's like, it's very easy to say Jeff Bezos has whatever, $300 billion. And if we could just tax him at 50%, suddenly we would have our $150 billion, that we need. Jeff Bezos does not have $300 billion. Jeff Bezos has very little, he still has a ton, but very little liquid money. And once you started taxing it, you'd realize it wasn't there. And if they actually had to come up with it, everything would just totally collapse. They couldn't pull that money out of the market.
And typically how progressive economists deal with this issue is the reason why they like to go through government is because government is a way of organizing a process of debt. And what that means is you go through a bond market. So you create a really good piece of debt. And progressive economists like healthy debt. They don't like unhealthy debt, fair enough, but they like healthy debt. And generally healthy debt, which is a Keynesian concept, is a way of getting big spending projects accomplished. Mm-hmm. And there were times when we taxed people a lot more, in the 50s and the 40s, significant income tax rates. But again, you also had different job markets. You had not different concepts of debt generally, but you had more of this healthy debt concept. You hadn't run into any of the stagflation issues of the 1970s. And you hadn't installed neoliberalism for 50 years. Everything was being built for the first time, which creates a much more functional form of economics. And so the only way you could get around the tax of the rich is through a bond market, in part. You can combine the approaches, but they're both debt-based approaches, highly monetarized, and our monetary system is presently a financialized system. Mm-hmm. So, good job. Good luck going through, I'll read it, but sure, I agree, but not to overuse Carney's values idea, but your ideas of post-market, which I like, is great, but democratic socialists bringing other values besides profit as priorities for society is a step forward and may eventually become post-market, which I'm here for. Lots of people argue for a certain pragmatism, a pragmatic approach to political opportunity, a situationalism, if you will. I also am skeptical of situationalism. I kind of believe in pure difference. I don't believe in incremental change. I believe kind of in radical and fairly abrupt change. And so I would like to believe that, some post-market idea will emerge out of people not necessarily radically emphasizing profit. But let's be precise here. I don't know if profit is the issue. Profit is not a problem insofar as, profit is the part of capitalism where things get a little bit too much. Profit is where things get too excessive. No. The entire system is excessive.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the sort of issue, is that democratic social, bringing other values besides profit as priority for society, is a step forward. The thing is, though, I don't think a lot of that stuff has been necessarily a priority for society, and that, you know, a lot of these things, you know, the values here are, sure, in some ways, I don't know, freedom of movement, you know, with the free buses, good nutrition with the state-run enterprises, you know, grocery markets, but all of these rely on a market society. So I don't know that, you know, all of these things, this affordability crisis is so intimately tied to a market society that I don't know that it actually brings us any closer to post-market. In fact, it may even tie us more strongly to markets. I mean, that's the big
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders criticism, is if your utopian view of democratic socialism involves Wall Street still existing. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Not that we should pin everything on Wall Street. I think we don't want to overuse the Wall Street as a criticism here, but definitely there's a spectrum that includes Bernie Sanders and the people at NATO right now, insofar as basically their approach is you need to solve labor issues. You know, you need to solve the big labor issues. You need to solve capital issues. But what if neither of those things are the problem? The really scary thing is that our entire concept of freedom, not just our concept of nutrition, our entire concept of freedom is tied to liberalism. Liberalism is collapsing. Right now, we have a deep political and philosophical challenge to come up with another concept of freedom, one that is not based on liberal commercialism. You know, that's the scary thing, is that we have been very free under liberalism. But liberalism is collapsing. The center of liberalism cannot hold. And we better figure out how to fix freedom beyond liberalism.
Totally.
Serious issue. Yeah. And for that reason, I would like to see a political person who says that. Why can't we say such a thing? Why can't Mamdani or Carney or whatever? I mean, they're different and all the same. But, you know, why can't someone come and say we need a new concept of freedom? Liberalism is collapsing. You know, this is not what Trump is doing, and this is important. You know, he's not come up with a new concept of freedom, not at all.
Totally.
And I think actually it's a little bit scary that people feel that the Middle East has entered a new chapter of instability, and it is scarier than the endless war syndrome. You know, I don't want the endless wars back. I really don't. But, you know, the war syndrome that we're in the Middle East is scary as well. The volatility of it, I'm sorry, I don't think is like anything in Iraq or Afghanistan. Even as people are lying through their teeth about Iran, I think there's an understanding that the establishment, and Carney included, are basically just continuing the discourse that they really were going to try and create this nuclear weapon.
Totally.
I don't know what they were doing. I actually think the truth is that nobody seemed to know. Otherwise, they would have acted. But it's like with North Korea. You don't play with fire. You know, if the North Koreans do have the capabilities, and they do, it's very scary. But it's also clearly a kind of party line. And nobody wants to upset Trump right now. So they're not going to tell us, no, Iran doesn't really have them. In any event, the instability is unreal. Yeah.
No.
Thank you for your questions, Timbits99. It's a very Canadian name.
It is a very Canadian
I assume
name.
you like Timbits and you were probably born in 1999, which means
as do we.
which means you're the same age as us, which means I wonder if we know who you are, but I don't know.
I don't know either. Let us know. Should we move on to this telescope?
Yeah, that's more a fun thing.
The
to
big
talk
beautiful telescope?
The big beautiful telescope. Yeah, could we get this
Yeah.
photo of the? Yes, I knew it. I knew it was Travis. I had it.
Hey. Nice to
That's
nice
hilarious.
to see you.
Thank you for joining the stream.
Yeah, seriously. So this is an image from a new telescope.
Yeah, I love this image. It's a particularly powerful image if you go on theglobeandmail.com, and you can see how they format it. It sounds so boring and trivial, but to those of us who are interested in...
I don't subscribe to the Globe and Mail. Aiden does. We can use your login if you want.
No, I won't.
We can pull it up.
I wish, but no. You can see it through Radical Priorities, even better. We're streaming while showing an image of this new telescope. I don't really care about the telescope, to be honest. What I care about is how we can show very beautiful and complex information through the internet, basically effortlessly. One of the points I like to make is that information as it exists on markets is a particular kind of information. It's largely commercial information. As we discussed in the last episode, it's information that has to do with objects and commodities in a very specific sense. And I love it. And I love it for 700 years. But it's been 700 years. The game is up.
Yeah.
And now we need a new system of information, a new way to describe for us what information is, a new way to produce information, and a new way to regulate information. And markets rely upon information entirely through prices, passing through and helping us to coordinate every decision that we make, from how we should, whether we should build this, and if we should build it, where we should build it. And it's it's combination of markets that help us get to a final product, like a block of houses or a new military contract. So I always love when I see really good examples on the internet of information that can be just communicated with an effortlessness. I think people understand the significance of this photo, and maybe it's a kind of older technology in a weird way. It's not that you could have shown this in an old, 19th century radical newspaper, but maybe you could have shown something like it, and there would have been an intimacy with information that was not necessarily fully disclosed by markets, which I think is really important. Except now it's in high def, and I can have it on my computer, and I can send it anywhere. And that should show you that our concept of information clearly has changed.
No, absolutely. It makes me think about I think we talked about it the other day, the 1969 broadcast of man landing on the moon was such a uniting, it was such an intimate experience of consuming media. And I was reminded of this because I was watching Mad Men, and it's all of the characters. And then there's the great pitch the next day where Peggy says, you know what I realized yesterday? I realized that last night we were all doing the exact same thing at the exact same time and feeling the same way about it. And I realized for how long I had been aching for it.
Okay. And here's my issue with this. The reason why I think it's a bit of a fiction is that, and this is one of the underlying sort of just realities of Mad Men, the television show, is that, it's about a bunch of bad men who are creating modern consumer society.
Totally.
Which we'll definitely leave to rail against on the podcast. But why do I dislike this? Only because I like it as a thought, as a poetic moment, as a Peggy moment, as a kind of art, definitely. But as politics, I hate it. Because, no, I want an actual moment of unification.
Totally.
I don't care about putting anyone on the moon. Couldn't care less. And while I admire the use of the television in that case, the point is to build a society on that basis. And yes, we've used the radio and television, and it's filtered through, and it absolutely has changed society. But it's never been used as a jumping off point to reinvent the axioms of society. Maybe that only happened a couple times, and they were only ever possibilities, but the radio was very close to changing some certain things. At least there were very radical political movements that emerged out of the radio society. But I don't think that the radio was good enough to create an entire society of its own. Maybe if we had done radical priorities in the 1930s, we would have been arguing very intensely for the use of the radio.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And we could have thought of all kinds of solutions which involve the radio. How to solve education, how to solve... And in fact, actually, that was exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So we would have been very accurate. So I assume we're being very accurate now when we say that the internet is going to be just too important not to think about. And the hope is that it will actually create a moment of unity. Not a kind of commercial or consumerist unity, but a genuine moment of unity, of actual political unity. But we're going to have to you have to figure out the politics for that.
Totally.
You have to abstract what an internet society will actually look like.
It might look like this.
Okay. Well, we're living it. Again, thank you again, Timbits99, aka Travis.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for listening to all the episodes. We appreciate your support.
We really do.
1,000%. Okay.
I don't know. What do we want to hop to? We're also at an hour.
I think we've
I think we did it.
done a good job today. We've exhausted. We've covered a lot of ground, actually.
Yeah.
I love doing these streams.
Yeah, me too. We're
very
definitely gonna keep this up. It's very fun. I think this is probably. So this week we had our kind of long episode, which I guess was not an episode of Radical Priorities.
Well, it was not a news episode,
right?
Because we're sort of rejiggling.
Yeah.
Doing news.
Yeah.
Like we sort of did news today.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more of an internal feature.
But I think that this might be more of the schedule is maybe a more focused topic for an episode. In this case, it was more philosophical. You know, we discussed what the internet means for materiality, and we wanted to explain materiality and kind of the more fundamental philosophical concepts that go into thinking about things in this way.
And 700 years of market society.
Totally. And how that's led to the internet, and how the internet lets us, you know, look back at that differently and hopefully look to the future differently. And then the stream, it might be more for these live reacts. So we might kind of flip it on its head a little bit, which I think makes a lot of sense.
I love the questions.
Yeah.
The questions had a real dynamism. I like, reading the articles together is great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's a dynamic way to present information and to think politically.
Totally. Well, that's the thing, is I think that we often, you know, we come in, we read it for the first time, we maybe have our first thought. First thought is not always necessarily best thought, and then we rejig it and we, you know, go through it. And I think that that's kind of the point. I think that's the point of watching someone have a conversation. You know, there's a difference between watching someone give a speech. You know, we love watching whatever Zizek, you know, give long addresses that are amazing. But we also love watching him when he's with Giannis or when he's with someone else.
Yeah,
and when
sure.
he's with, it's great. You know, it's great to
yeah.
watch the thinking and have someone react to something for the first time.
You also need a platform for that thinking, and this is our platform for our thinking.
Yeah.
We're thinking live.
Totally. Maybe that's what we should be called. Thinking Live, Radical Priorities Thinking Live, episode 1. But anyways, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one, hopefully a week from now.
Bye-bye.
See ya.